Good evening, everybody. I'm just a little bit early. Hopefully everybody can see me. I hope this is working. I'm going to record this on my computer too, just to be sure. And I'll upload later if something goes wrong with the YouTube stream. But if you're having trouble seeing anything, pop into the comments and let me know. I wanted to come on a couple minutes early to, first off, say there's been a change of plans. So my original guest, Mr. James Norton, a former college classmate of mine, who is a heavy metal guitarist in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, a Berklee School of Music graduate, which if you don't know a whole lot about music colleges, that's kind of a big deal. But he is not able to join us this week because I got a call from him like just right before this that he may have been exposed to the virus and needed to go get tested, and they had an opening tonight. So he's doing that right now. Wasn't sure if he was going to be back. So we're going to put him in on a later video, and I'm excited to talk to him. I have another special guest here tonight who is sitting in my lap and is the most precious person in the entire world, and that is my brother's dog, Chloe, as I'm at his house. So Chloe and I are going to do the video today, aren't we, girl? Yeah, sweet little thing. All right, get down out of my headphones, crazy. Oh, she's precious. You're all tangled up, aren't you? Goodness, I know. So, welcome to this week's episode of Level Up Your Playing with Mr. Goff. This is also going to be the last one of these that we're going to do live. I'm going to start pre-recording these, I think, so I can edit them and do some other things. Yes, Chloe agrees that that's a great idea. So Chloe and I are going to just go through it today and talk to you about some different things. So last week we talked a lot about practicing and about different techniques that you can use to practice really anything to help you get better, and especially focusing on the 10 pennies technique, which is one of my absolute favorites for slow and consistent practice. But another question I get asked a lot as a teacher, both from my students at school and from students that I teach privately, is what do I need to be practicing, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about some general things with practicing and with warming up today, because those are two things that I think get neglected a whole lot by young musicians, especially as you're going through your daily practice routine. So let's get started. So warming up, and a lot of the techniques I'm going to be showing are going to be for brass and woodwind instruments. Some of them, and I'll let you know what they are. Now I'll also be talking a little bit about percussion as well. If you play a string instrument or you play piano or guitar or really any other kind of instrument, there are some things that are going to be applicable to those things. So just kind of stick around and bear with me while I talk about some of the other things, and we'll get to that. So let's talk through warming up first. So warming up is extremely important. I have, especially you brass players who are like, how do I increase my range on my instrument, right? Like, how do I get to where I can play higher? Well, warming up is a big key to that, right? So if you've done any kind of athletics, you know that there are a lot of things you can't do athletically until you've warmed up, right? You've got to get blood pumped into those muscles. You've got to develop those like basic coordination skills and all that kind of stuff so that you can do certain things. So like a good runner is going to stretch and stuff before they take off to run a mile, because somewhere in the middle there, if they haven't stretched properly, they're going to fatigue faster. They're going to risk possibly injuring themselves or getting a cramp or something along those lines. So you want to make sure, just like a athlete stretches and an athlete's warm up, we're also going to warm up. And there's a lot of different things that you can do as far as warm up things. If you are a brass or woodwind musician, you want to make sure and warm up. The first thing you want to warm up are your lungs. Okay, so in the course of regular breathing during the day, as you're just going about your business, breathing like a normal person, you're not using but a fraction of your total lung capacity. All right, we tend to breathe really shallow breaths naturally. Okay, your lungs are capable of so much more, and shallow breathing is really going to hamper a lot of things about your tone and everything like that. So you want to do some different breathing stretches to kind of help to loosen up your lungs and expand that, and to get used to that feeling of fullness in your lungs, right? So one of the things I have my kids do, we'll do metered breathing, to where I'll breathe in for a certain number of seconds and breathe out for a certain number. And I try to start with them the same. So like breathe in for 4 counts, breathe out for 4 counts. And then we'll start making the out breathing a little bit longer and the in breathing shorter. And the goal is to still take in as much air, even though you're shortening the amount of time you have to take it in. And then to conserve your air for the entire amount of time. So if I'm breathing in for 2 counts and out for 8 counts, I want to use all 8 counts to get that air out, but I want my lungs to be empty at the end of 8 counts. Okay. And then I'll eventually go 1 count in, 16 counts out, and then we'll do 1 count in, 20 counts out, and sometimes I get really crazy with them and I'm like 42 counts out or something like that. And most of us can't make it that long, but it's the exercise in trying it, like getting used to controlling your breathing. The other thing you want to do, and really, I've been doing these backwards in my own practice and when I'm working with students, and I'm going to start changing that to where I do these the other way around. But the other one I'm going to do is, this one focuses on making sure that your breath passage stays open. All right. You don't want any kind of tension when you breathe in, because if you have tension when you breathe in, you'll have tension when you breathe out, right? So we're going to take a deep, complete breath in and a complete breath out. But in this particular one, we're going to hold our breath just to kind of stretch the lungs, okay? So a way that you can check the openness of your whole breathing apparatus, your mouth, your throat, your posture, and everything like that. First, you want to sit as tall as you can, all right, and really kind of stretch that posture up. You're trying to make as much space between the bottom of your ribs and the top of your hips as possible, okay? So you want to stretch kind of tall, and then we're going to put our hand in front of our face and breathe in. And you should hear, I don't know if you can hear it on here, but it should be a really low sound, like wind blowing across the opening of a cave, right? Instead of a fast or a high-pitched sound, like, or if you hear throat tension, it'll kind of be you hear the rule I give on any kind of breathing, I call it ninja breathing, okay? So ninjas, there's 3 traits about a ninja. They are silent, they're quick, and they're effective. And our breathing needs to be exactly the same. When we breathe in, we don't want it to really make a sound, okay? We want to hear air moving, but we don't want to hear throat parts vibrating against each other or air being pulled past your teeth or your tongue, okay? Chloe is very interested in these breathing techniques, aren't you? Yeah. So we don't want to, or we want to keep it silent. Okay. Quick. There are times where you have to sneak a breath really fast, but you need to get a whole lung full of air, right? So we want our breathing to be pretty fast. Silly dog. And so really fast breath in. What are you doing? As we do that, okay? All right, it's time for you to get down, I think. Oh, say goodbye to the people. And down you go. Okay, so quick, silent, and effective is the other one. So a ninja always gets the job done, right? They wouldn't be much of a ninja if they had a high fail rate. So we want to, when we take that quick breath in, we want to completely fill our lungs with air in 1 count, that quickly, okay? So I'll start with my hand in front of my face, and that's a ninja breath, all right? Now, some things to check. You should practice this in front of a mirror. You don't want to get taller when you breathe, okay? So if your posture is bad, when you breathe in, you'll inflate like one of those like floppy arm bendy man at the car dealership, right? We don't want to inflate, okay? You should already be as tall as you can be sitting so that when you breathe in, your stomach comes out instead of, or out this way just a little bit instead of coming up, right? So sit tall, stomach comes out just a little bit, all right? And the air fills from bottom to top as you breathe in, or that's kind of the goal, all right? Sometimes I tell my kids, breathe into your toes, all right? Create as much space there as you can and fill it up in an instant, okay? All right, so we'll do that, and then or we can do it slowly. Once your lungs are completely full of air, hold it for about 2 to 3 seconds, all right? That gives your lungs time to stretch out just a little bit and get acclimated to that, and then we sip air past that. So until you have no more room in your lungs. You've sipped all the way up to the top, and hold it. And we hold it between 15 and 30 seconds, and then we'll let it go, release it out, okay? So those are great ways to kind of warm up your lungs, get that breathing apparatus working. If you play a keyboard instrument or a string instrument or a percussion instrument, your primary way of making sound are your hands, all right, your fingers. And so you want them to kind of be nice and limbered up too. And so a lot of times, just to get blood flowing, I'll clench and unclench, and clench and unclench, and clench and unclench. And it just kind of pumps some blood. I can already feel the blood kind of moving through my fingers, right? You might also, my fingers will pop probably, but stretch those fingers out just a little bit. All right, and the same thing the other direction. And you might do the same with your wrists, especially for pianists and percussionists, because you want really loose wrists, loose and floppy. But kind of do the same on both sides, about 10 to 15 seconds on each of those stretches. Don't forget your thumbs. Okay. And with any kind of stretching, kind of the rule of thumb is if it hurts, don't do it, or don't do it too long. Stretching shouldn't hurt a ton. Okay. So if you're feeling pain, you need to not stretch as hard, okay? But just kind of, and then just kind of shaking it out. I do that a lot, especially long piano playing times, right? Okay. And then you might just do little dexterity things. So sometimes I'll do that where I'm tapping. I don't know if you can hear that. But trying to keep those taps even so that you're working those kinds of things. If you're a piano player, the Hanon studies are really good, little warm-up things for finger exercises and stuff like that, just getting you moving through some scales with note skips and different things like that. Working those Hanon studies is really helpful, and it will help your sight reading a lot. Lots of good can come out of Hanon studies, so I would work on those. I do a lot of scales on guitar. That kind of helps with me with those kinds of things. If you're playing percussion, you might just try 8 on a hand, and then switch to 4 on a hand, and then 2 on a hand, 1 on a hand, and stop or whatever. Just something to kind of get your body and your mind thinking musically, right? Because we use these parts of our body, whether they're our lungs or our voices, if you're a singer, or your hands, for a lot of different things. Warming up is an opportunity for you to kind of switch your brain over to start thinking about using those things musically, okay? So that can be pretty important. All right, so those are some basic kind of stretch and warm up kind of things that you can look at. I'll probably in a later video, I'm gonna show you some different kind of muscle relaxing things that we can do, some breathing exercises and some like gentle massage kind of things that you can do on yourself that will help with your playing ability as well. Okay, from here, there are some musical skills that kind of transfer across a lot of different things. So the first thing I'm going to show you here is actually a video. This video is from the ballet Romeo and Juliet by Prokofiev, okay? And in this ballet, lots of different stuff's going on. But this particular movement of this, it's called Juliet the Young Girl. I want you to listen, especially to the violin parts, these high string parts, And listen if you can recognize the pattern that's going on here, okay? So here it goes. All right, and that's all I want to show you. So the main idea here is dun da 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 dun dun da 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 dun. And if you've been studying any kind of music for very long, you will recognize what that is immediately. That's a major scale, right? Dun da 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 dun bum bum bum. And then the next section, bum 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 bum, is an arpeggio in the same key. All right. So scales, and as soon as I say scales, every single music student out there groans inside and outside, because scales are everyone's least favorite thing to do in the entire world, okay? But scales are incredibly helpful, and there's a reason that we do scales. It's because, guess what? All of Western music is based on scales, every last bit of it. Everything from One Direction to Bach is based in scales. So if you can master scales, you will be leaps and bounds ahead of everyone in sight reading, in your regular playing. Scales are incredibly handy, okay? I can't tell you how many times, college was really the first time that I dove into this and started kind of discovering this. But anytime I'm going through music, one of the first things I do is I start looking for scale patterns. And I'll say, oh, this entire 2 measures is just this scale. And since I've already worked on those scales, I don't even have to think about reading those notes when I get to it, because I'll label it A major scale. Boom, there it is, and I just play it, right? So scales are incredibly important. There are a lot, like I said, it's a pattern that a lot of music is based on. So as you are getting ready to do some study, let me direct you to a place. I'm based in Arkansas, and so the ASBOA is this Arkansas School Band and Orchestra Association. This is their website. If I go down to links to important info, and then the third one down says all region, all state clinic audition materials. I can click on that, and it will load in a second. Yeah. And then depending on what grade you're in, this might be kind of hard to see. We've got junior high scales, wind and percussion, senior high scales, wind and percussion, and percussion rudiments. If you're a string person, they also have string scales. If you don't play any of those instruments, like if you're a keyboard player or you're a guitar player, there are some really great scale sheets out there. Just Google piano scales, guitar scales, all that kind of stuff. One thing you do want to be sure that you get when you look up piano and guitar scales is make sure that it has the fingerings on there, okay? Knowing when to cross fingers on each hand is extremely important in piano, and knowing which ones go where. So practicing scales with the wrong fingerings on those instruments can actually be really harmful down the road. So just make sure that you have the right ones. Again, try to find one that's got a fingering chart on it, or consult with a piano or guitar teacher, and they can help you out with that, okay? But scales, and you should get to the point where, and I'll show you the junior high scales for alto saxophone, because that's kind of my primary instrument. So alto bari sax, I want the PDF one. Okay, so what I used to do in junior high is I memorized the order of the scales, first of all. So it goes G major, E minor, A major, F sharp minor, B flat major, B major, C major, A minor, D major, B minor, E major. And we only had 14 scales that we had to have memorized in junior high. So I just went through all of the scales in order. After I learned each one of them, like I'd take like one every couple days and memorize it, or one every week and memorize it. And so after 14 weeks, I've worked through all of my scales. Well, then I'd start at the beginning and I'd play every scale straight through and play this entire scale sheet top to bottom. Except sometimes I would start at the bottom and work my way up to the top. And if I made a mistake, I would start over again and keep going. And it got to the point where I could play any of these scales in my sleep, right? And then when we went on to high school, there are a few more in the high school scale of the high school scale sheets here. Senior high. Scales, there it is. Okay. When I got to senior high, it was kind of the same thing. So, saxophone. I'd start down here and I would play through them. Okay. I will say this for my Arkansas people: your major scales are all the same this year. Your minor scales are all different. Starting this year, we're using the harmonic minor instead of the natural minor, which is what we've been using. So you're going to have to, if you've memorized these scales before in Arkansas, you're going to have to relearn them. Hey, guess what? That's not really a big deal. In college, you will have to learn all forms of the minor scale. Just put on your seatbelt and get ready. Okay, so those are scales. You just got to do them. It's kind of like eating your vegetables. You have to play scales at some point. And it's not just something that your teachers are making you do because they're evil. Although we do take great pleasure out of causing you distress, that is not why we prescribe scales. Scales are entirely for your benefit, all right? Okay, so that's scales. Another thing you might work on that's kind of in the same vein as this are arpeggios and thirds. All right, so let me see if I can find, that's chromatic scale. There it is. Okay, so I just pulled this up. I will try to post links to these at some point. I borrowed these from another school, but here they have thirds in all of the main keys that you play in band. Okay, most of the important, I guess, keys. It's a great place to start. So they go through this exercise of thirds, which is just da 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 da. And so those interval studies are really important. Thirds is a pretty common one. Then at the end, it has this arpeggio, da 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 da, right? Which we heard in that Prokofiev example before. Bum 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 bum. Right? That's just an arpeggio. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so arpeggios, scales, and thirds. They're some of the most tedious and the most boring things to practice, in my personal opinion, but they are also some of the most valuable, okay? So it kind of leads me to another important principle behind practicing in general, which is this. The thing you want to practice the least is probably the thing you need to practice the most, okay? So just make sure that you are practicing the stuff that you need to practice and not just the stuff that you want to. Now, it is very important to play music, right? To have fun as you're doing it. But also practice the stuff that's like eating your vegetables because it's what makes you better, right? Okay, so that's thirds and arpeggios. The chromatic scale. It's the scariest for everyone for some reason, but honestly, once you kind of dig into the chromatic scale, it is not hard. So just make sure that you are working through any of those kinds of scales. And we'll get to that in a second. Okay. I want to kind of give you a pyramid for practice. So like priorities for practicing, okay? So at the bottom of your pyramid, the most important thing that you can practice, as my brother is about to walk into his house, the most important thing that you can practice is tone quality, okay? So as you're working on your instrument, let's say you're a trombone player, right? And you're working through some trombone player things. If your instrument doesn't sound like a trombone, right? If instead it sounds like a large brass fart cannon, like it doesn't matter if you have all the right slide positions and all the right articulations, there is a very large bug that just flew into my house and is right on my computer screen. You never know what's going to happen on Level Up You're Playing with Mr. Goff. As I... Well, let's see. There, it's behind me. It is a very large bug. Okay. I'm not afraid of bugs. I just don't like them on me as I yelp like a small girl. Hi. Welcome to Level Up. You're playing with Mr. Goff. I'm not afraid of little bugs. Okay. What was I saying? Tone quality. All right. So it doesn't matter if you play all the notes right, all the slide positions right, all that kind of stuff. If you are not making a decent sound on your instrument, it doesn't really matter. So couple things. So for brass and woodwind players, we'll start with you guys. Long tones are like one of the best things that you can do to kind of help with this. So for brass players, let me show you a good example. So these flow studies are, and I just looked up this guy's name that I'm not even going to try to pronounce, but I think it's Chikowitz. Just looked up Chikowitz flow studies and found this. So there are like several sets, and you notice that they kind of go through this same pattern. They recommend that you play these at starting at 50 beats per minute, and that's really slow, so get your metronome out. And the goal is on every one of these notes to make them sound consistent in volume, that the tone is consistent, so it just sounds like a wall of uniform sound instead of, you want it to be really stable and pure. So you don't want to use vibrato on these or anything like that. It's also very important that these are slurred, okay? And you will have to move some valves. So like this starts open, second, open, 1, 2, open, 1, 2, open, right? And then they change. So you want to move your valves quickly too, even though you're going really slow, still move your valves quickly so that you're not smearing into notes and stuff like that. As you get confident with set 1 of these, you go on to set 2. Right? And then we go on to set 3. Right. And it takes you through this in a couple of different key centers, always gradually working your way lower. And the goal of this, especially you look at set 4, if you're a trumpet player, you recognize that this is kind of a higher note for you, right? So it's getting that flexibility in your lips, not so much, so that's why tonguing is really important, because tonguing can kind of be a crutch for us for hitting partials and stuff like that on a brass instrument. But slurring between these is really important, but then slotting each of those notes to where they come out clearly and you hear them and stuff like that. And practicing slurring between individual notes on this. I've done that before as well. We're just going C, D, and hitting that consistently, and then going da, 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 da. Right. Hitting those notes consistently over and over again is really important. And then expert level, like hard mode, set 6, where you're going all the way to that E above. Yeah. So very exciting. So yeah, just Google these. You should be able to find them. It was like the second result I found, and they have them for all brass instruments, but these are super awesome. So flow studies. The other thing is just working sirens on a brass instrument. So just taking the mouthpiece. I actually find it works a little bit better for me if I take a mouthpiece and then just like a short piece of straw, maybe about that long, and stick it over the end. If you play a bigger instrument like tuba or something like that, you might have to find those like extra large like boba straws or like smoothie straws or something. They're really big. But you slap a straw in there and just practice buzzing notes. Doing sirens, just going and working your way higher and lower as you do them is handy. Another thing that is, and I tell this to beginners on brass instruments all the time, sit down with your mouthpiece in front of the TV, take a little short piece of straw, stick it on, and then just buzz along to the theme songs of shows, or, listening to the radio, or got your headphones in, just pull your mouthpiece out and do some buzzing, and it can be really beneficial. Okay. Flow studies, lip slurs, and doing some buzzing exercises, all really helpful for brass players, okay? For brass too, this is a little bit more important than it is for other instruments, but making sure that you warm up and warm down. So when you finish playing, go back through the flow studies again and work your way down. Doing long tones, just holding notes for an indefinite amount of time, and keeping them stable and working your way down. So starting at like, for brass players, like your in staff, your fourth line F, and working your way down. If you are a horn player, starting at your second line G and working your way down. If you're a trumpet player, starting at your second line G and working your way down. And working your way all the way down to the lowest notes on the horn, just really slowly, and working on just pushing blood back into those lips, right? Warming down can be really handy. All right. Now another thing, if you play a woodwind instrument, we've already talked about a lot of the woodwind things that I wanted to cover, which was in other things. So scales are really important for woodwind players. More than any other instrument, we can execute scales very quickly, except for maybe like strings and keyboards and stuff like that. We can execute scales very quickly, and we get asked to do that a lot. So knowing those scales is really handy. Another thing, and this is a clarinet exercise, again, a lot of this stuff I'm stealing online, and it's just out there. So this is from the North Texas College of Music Clarinet Handbook, all right? And scroll down here, and they've got register slur exercises, where they're just practicing very slowly again, slurring. And you notice that, like, so this is low A, which is thumb 1 2 3 1 2, right? And they are just, the next note is that high E, which is the same fingering with the register key. So they're adding the register key, and then the high C sharp there is lift your first finger. Okay, so it's A, E, C sharp, E, and then you repeat it. And then you go in quarter notes. And then in eighth notes. Just between those top register things. And then he changes notes. So now we're back to thumb 1 2 3 first finger, and then with register key, and then lift. And it kind of goes through the length of the horn this way, okay, until we get to E, and then C, F, C, and then this super high note there that, to be fair, I think that's an A, but I was having trouble reading it too. So working your way through these exercises, and then these tuning and legato studies, and these are working intervals too. And working my way back down. Lots of different exercises. These are little, the chromatic exercises that alternate. Especially on clarinet, because when you get around here, around this measure and this measure, so that's like the end of the second line, beginning of the third, you're switching pinkies a lot, and that switchy pinky stuff is really important on clarinet. So working something like that is really handy. Saxophone players doing register jumps, and then if you're kind of more advanced, for you guys, it's as you start working into altissimo, working on overtones. And if you want more information about overtones, you can put it in the comments there, and I will try to answer you guys on that. But overtone exercises are really important. Okay, for percussionist, I'm going to go back to that ASBOA website, because percussionists, you guys kind of have to do a little bit of all of this, right? Not the lip stuff, because if you're playing a percussion instrument with your lips, you're probably doing it wrong. But let's go back here to All-State Region Clinic Audition Materials. I'll go to, well, we've already talked about scales, and so keyboard scales are really important, and making sure that your sticking is consistent on those, that you're alternating sticking on scales, right? Alternating between left and right hands. You don't ever want to double stick on a scale as you're practicing through those. The other thing is, nope, not what I wanted. And you should be able to look these up. Pretty standard. These are called the Percussive Arts Society drum rudiments, okay? And there are 40 of them that are just kind of the standard rudiments that you're expected to know. So you've got single stroke rolls, single stroke fours, single stroke, so these roll rudiments, right? You've got different multiple bounce rudiments, double stroke, roll rudiments, diddle rudiments, all this kind of stuff. If you've been a percussionist for very long, you know about rudiments. If you are not, like let's say you're a set drummer and you're mostly self-taught, rudiments are a really useful tool for you guys too. And you can find YouTube videos that'll teach you how to do rudiments. I would say though, be very careful with that. YouTube lies sometimes, and there are lots of people in there that don't know what they're doing. So find a drum teacher. Again, if you have questions about rudiments, ask in the comments, and I'd be happy to direct you to some resources that'll help with those. But this is the bread and butter of percussion stuff. I would say probably 80-90% of what you guys do on drums is based entirely in rudiments, right? And it helps to get those common sticking patterns down and things like that. So really, really, really work rudiments if you're going to be doing that. Okay. I started to talk about this earlier, and then I got distracted. So priorities as far as practicing, and so this sort of pyramid thing. Tone quality is number one, all right? Making sure you make a good sound on your instrument. For brass and woodwind people, that's where those long tones come in, right? Making sure that your instrument sounds like your instrument. And if it doesn't, that's a point where you need to start asking for help, especially with tone on those instruments, right? There's not other instruments, guitar, piano, the percussion instruments, you can see the problem, but it's always a visual thing, right? So like if my frets are buzzing on guitar, I know that I need to push my fingers down a little bit harder and keep them a little bit closer to the frets maybe. If I've got a real thumpy sound on the guitar, it's another finger pressure issue, right? If I'm plucking too hard, that's really easy to hear and see. Piano, same thing. Like if I can see what I'm doing with piano to know what the mistakes are going on. And then percussion, it's like stick height, where you're hitting on the drum, a whole bunch of other things. But it's all visual. With voice, with woodwind instruments and brass instruments, it's not that obvious. It's you diagnose by hearing. And so especially with those, you need someone who has been trained to be a technician with those kinds of things. So find a voice teacher, find a choir director, find a band teacher or a private lesson teacher on those instruments who can help you figure out what's going on with tone and then help tell you how to fix it too. There are also some really great books out there. So right offhand, for saxophone players, I know the Saxophonist Workbook by Larry Teal is a really great one that I think every saxophone player should own. In fact, I just sent one of my private lesson students home with my copy of the Saxophonist Workbook to work on things out of there. But he gives a really great description of the embouchure, like the mouth shape for saxophone. For clarinet, pretty much anything by Ray Chapa. His textbooks on the clarinet are phenomenal, and he has a bunch of really good exercises for helping with tone. And then those are the two that I know because I'm a woodwind person. But, find a person who plays your instrument, and they can connect you to resources. And if you don't have a person that can do that, again, post in the comments, and I will connect you with somebody who can help you with those things. So tone quality, very, very, very important. The next thing I'm working on as I'm practicing, once I feel like I have a good sound, is I want to make sure that my pitch and my rhythms are on, right? I'm playing the correct notes, I'm playing them in tune, and I'm playing the correct rhythms on things. There are several things that you can practice that if you practice them wrong, or if you start not practicing them correctly, they form bad habits and they're really bad to fix. So pitch and rhythm is one of the first ones. The only thing that I know of that is not difficult to fix if you start in a place that's not correct is tempo, right? And in my last video, I talked a whole lot about start slow and gradually work your way faster, okay? And that's very important. So with pitch and rhythm, I'm gonna go as slowly as I can when I'm first working on a piece of music to be able to get those things correct. And then I'll work with a metronome to get them faster. But you don't want to sacrifice those things. After I feel like I've gotten those things down, or kind of at the same time, I guess, I'm also going to work on my breathing and my phrasing, okay? So this is kind of for woodwind people, but for others also. For string players, your phrases are usually all marked. You have phrase markings that look like slurs that go across that show bowings and different things like that. But also, check with, if you're in an orchestra, check with your principal player, whoever's sitting first chair, however they are bowing for your section, that's how you bow, and get with them and kind of mark that. And you guys, that's something that's really great about string instruments is you have phrase markings because you have the down bow and the up bow markings, right? Really what you're looking for with phrasing is you're trying to build musical sentences. So it's kind of like when you're first learning how to read. Notes and rhythms are your alphabet, and you can kind of sound words out with those. Then measures are kind of like your words that make up your sentence. And when you're learning to read, at the very first, you're trying to sound things out. The, k, at, cat, and it takes forever to read that way. And it's really hard for you to remember what the idea is about when you're trying to break apart how the word is supposed to sound. As you get more advanced, you can start reading some words on sight. The cat. But even that is really slow. Eventually you have to get to where you're reading sentences and ideas at a time, right? So like a good storyteller, a good reader, can kind of make it come alive with the tone of their voice and with the different things that they do. So your goal is to do that with your music as well eventually. And that's where phrasing comes in. Now for woodwind players and brass players, breathing is really important in phrasing, okay? So breathing in a place that makes sense. So if I'm about to give a really long sentence and I take a weird breath in the middle of it, it breaks up the idea and it sounds really bizarre to our ears, right? It's the same thing in music. There are these musical ideas that we don't want to break up with a breath. So making sure you're breathing in a place that's smart and that makes sense. And again, a teacher can go a long ways to helping you figure out where those are. Okay, after my breathing and my phrasing is good, then kind of at the same time, so pitch and rhythm, breathing and phrasing, and then this one also are kind of something we work on at the same time at a really slow tempo, because we don't ever want to do them wrong and get in the habit of doing them wrong, because then we have to break a bad habit on top of trying to learn something new, and that's very hard to do. But the next thing is going to be articulations and dynamics. So making sure that you're playing the written volume of things, and that if you are playing a woodwind instrument and it is marked with slurs in certain passages, that you're slurring the right notes and tonguing the right notes. That if it's marked staccato, that you're playing a great staccato, right? And getting those things uniform. If you are a string player, this is, are you playing détaché in a certain section? Are you supposed to be playing spiccato in a certain thing, and making sure that that sounds right? How much of your bow are you using, and how much kind of weight are you putting into that bow? How fast is your bow moving? All of those kinds of things are really important as far as dynamics, right? And articulation. So with piano, it's a lot of what are you doing with your hands and your wrist, right? Is it staccato, so are you kind of bouncing into it? Is it martellato, where you're kind of hammering it down into it? Is it more legato, which is a lot more finger motion? So really paying attention to those. For percussionists, your accents are crazy important. Accents can kind of take something in percussion and take it from sounding really bland and simple to kind of having a groove and like making a little bit more musical sense. A lot of times too, your accents line up with hits that are happening in the rest of the ensemble if you're playing with a group. So making sure that those hits line up is really important. And it kind of, hearing a percussion part in a group without those accents sounds really out of place. Like something is missing a lot of times. Okay, and the very last thing you work on is interpretation. Interpretation is where you take all of those little detail parts and put them together to form one big idea musically, to try to communicate something, all right? Tempo is also a part of interpretation, right? So the speed of something adds a lot of energy or can take a lot of energy away from a piece of music. And making sure that you have that speed right is critical. But tempo is the very last thing that you put on. It's kind of the icing on the cake, is getting it up to the speed that it's supposed to be. So those are your practice priorities. Make sure you have a good sound first and foremost. Make sure you've got the right notes and rhythms. Make sure you're doing all those little detail things right: breathing, phrasing, articulation, dynamics. And then eventually work it up into the whole piece of music, making that whole piece make sense and getting it up to the tempo that the composer wanted for it. Oh, that's a lot of information. So the nice thing is this video will be uploaded later. It'll be saved here. You can go back and watch it. I will say this, and I said this in the previous video too: plan out your practice time. It's like the best thing you can do to completely revolutionize how you play. Practice the things that are hard for you and not just the things that are easy, because that's how you get better, is by practicing hard stuff. And then take it in bite-sized chunks. But the biggest thing is go into practice with a plan. Know exactly what you're going to work on and how you're going to use that time. And that time will be so much more valuable for you. All right. That was a whole lot of me talking. But hopefully it gave you something that is valuable that you can apply to your own practice. And yeah, we didn't get to see my friend James this week. He will be coming in later. We're going to work him into the schedule. Next week, though, I do have another guest artist lined up. So another good friend of mine in the Houston area. He is a former classmate of mine and was my former roommate. His name is Cyrus Morris, and he is a saxophone player. Like I said, he is a teacher, but he is also a gig musician. He plays all over the place, like literally all over the United States, playing saxophone. Phenomenal jazz musician, and you'll definitely want to hear what Cyrus has to say. Super hardworking, and you'll learn a lot from our discussion. So we'll see you guys next week, and we're looking forward to it. Have a great rest of your week.